Go with that. All right, we're good to go. So hope everybody had a good weekend, and hope PA3 is going well. So I graded the midterm, and the midterm was really good. People did really well. If you feel like you underperformed, please talk to me, okay? There are cases where I know that people are getting this and they know how to do this, but they had trouble writing the code on the exam, and sometimes that's a time pressure, plus, you know, it's a weird format, doing this online. So if you know, something was going on, come and talk to me, okay? We can find more accurate ways to assess in some cases than, you know, a timed blind coding test. But by and large, the exams looked really good. Main thing that I saw was some difficulty still with going through linked lists. So let me just kind of give you an example. Let's say you have a linked list, right? So you have a struct node, and this is a link comprised of nodes, and you're asked to create a method that will, you know, say add up the data values in each of the nodes. So, you know, something like int sum, and we pass a node, which is a header. And we're going to call this by just saying, you know, sum will pass at the root node of this list, the first node of this list. So a few things to keep in mind here. One, you've always got to make sure that that your header is not null before you do anything with it. If I do something like, you know, if header.next or if header.data, before I've checked to see if header is null, I run the risk of a null pointer exception. Okay? So to go through this list, what I'd like to do is start with the header node, do whatever I want to do with its data, like add it to a running sum, like, you know, result. And then move down the list, set header equal to header next, and keep going till I get to the end of the list. So here's one way to do this, okay? And this is generally applicable to a lot of different data structures, a lot of different setups. So I want to know if my header is null, and I'm thinking in my head, header is the node that I'm about to do something with. So if my list looks like this, and header is this node right here, right? In my mind, this means this is the node I'm about to process. Okay, process for me right now is saying I want to take its data and add it to my running sum. So I'm just going to do a while loop, and I'm going to say while that thing, that temporary pointer, is meaningful. In other words, it's not null. I'm going to say result equals result plus header.data. So I've done something with that node's data, and then I'm going to move to the next node by saying header equals header.next. Now, is that a node I want to work with or not? I don't know, but I'm going to go back to the top of my loop. And I'm going to say, is it null? No, it's not. I'll take its data, add it to result. Now I've consumed that node's data, and I'm going to move header again. And now it's going to point to this third node. Is that null? No, I'm going to take its data, add it to my running sum. Going to set header equal to header next, so now header is going to be null. And when I come up here, I will kick myself out of my while loop, and then I can just return result. So that's a way to go through a list, right? And it's more or less always going to work. Now this is a list with no sentinel node. Okay, so we started with just, you know, the header that we were passed in. If we had a sentinel, we would start with header next, right, which might be null. But I would really just say, you know, header equals header next, and then go through my loop. There are different ways to do this. You can start with header next, right? Well, header next is not null, but if header is null, you're going to get an exception, so then you have to check for header null first, and if it's null, return 0. Okay, you can do that, but this will also take care of it. You can try to move to header next inside here and say, well, header next is not null, header equals header next. But you have to make sure you also take account of this first node's data. If I just start with header next, I risk skipping over that. And if I do, well, header next is not null, when I'm about to process this last node, if its next field is null, I'm going to kick out, and I need to still deal with that last node's data. So the problems I saw on this problem were either, you know, null pointer exceptions, or missing the first node, or skipping the last node. And this is always tricky, right? It's always edge casey. So you need to think about, you know, how does this start, how does it end, what happens if the list is empty, and so on. That's weird. It says there's one participant. I'm guessing there's more than that. All right. And once you know how to do this with one structure, right, it generally carries over to lots of different structures, right? Not just linked list, but stacks, queues, and trees and things like that. So if this was a little iffy for you, definitely recommend going back and thinking about different ways to do it. Okay. The other thing I saw on some of the problems was the problem where you're reading input and breaking it into words and then doing some analysis on that. The scanner class is very, very full featured, right? Scanner comes with all of these methods, including a pair of methods called hasNext, which says, is there another word? And next, which returns that next word, right? And if you're trying to break something up just on white space in between words, this pair of methods will do all the work for you. You don't need to read a whole string and do a split to break it up, and so on and so forth. You just say hasNext, next, hasNext, next. All right, so any questions on that, let me know either now or come to office hours or shoot me a note. Any questions on the midterm or on PA3 or on anything else we've done so far? All right, so let's play with Eclipse. So I switched to Photon last Thursday. I think in the afternoon section we talked about that. And let me talk about some details here. So preferences. There's tons of preferences you can set up. A big one is under typing. And so under Java editor typing, I can turn off the option to automatically complete my strings and my parentheses and my braces, to automatically insert semicolons and braces, to do auto indenting, although it still does some auto indenting, and so on and so forth. It's up to you if you want to do that or not, right? You may like the way that Eclipse is set up to begin with, or you may want to customize it. But typing takes care of a lot of the things that it's doing automatically. Completion is another one. So insert proposals automatically, insert common prefixes, and so on. I've turned off all of these things, including the Java proposals. And these are things that, you know, as you're typing, it's popping up suggestions for what you might finish typing, and it's putting in argument lists that I can overwrite or things like that. I've got most of that turned off. If you like it, leave it turned on, or, you know, just play around with it. Let's hop into some code. So let's make a Java project, and I'll call this it's gonna rain because it's going to rain. And I believe we already did this, but under install new software, you have to do this once in your life. Go ahead and pick photon and then find swing. And it's already installed for me, but if I show stuff I've already installed, what you're after are the general purpose tools, Swing Designer, Swing Documentation. Okay, those you want to install. And you only have to do that once until you update Eclipse and so on. So that lets me say File, New, and I can go to Other, and under Other I can come down to Window Builder, and under Window Builder, Swing Designer, and under that I can get to JFrame. Okay, give it a name, and we've got a frame. So now I've got code I can run. There's my JFrame. Okay, and I can exit by hitting the X up there. And remember, we have a pair of views for this. We have the source tab, which shows us the source code, and we have the design tab, which is this drag and drop interface that we're going to play with a lot today. So on the frame itself, so there's a content pane in here, and there's a frame up here. Okay. On the content pane, I'm going to come here to layout, and I'm going to switch this to absolute layout. That's going to let me do things like take a button and just drop it wherever I want and have it sit where I've dropped it. Okay. When I drop a button, it will let me type in a label for the button, which may not work, even though it is working. So the first few times that you put things into a new JFrame, my version of Eclipse hangs up. Okay, and it's not dreadful. I can hit the X to kick out of this, and when it asks me do I want to save changes, I'm going to say yes. And then I'm just going to go back and run it again. And wait, and close that out. And when I come to my design window, right, my button is there, and the label that I typed in for it is still there. And so here's a second button, and I'll call that button 2. And so you can drop these things wherever you want. And I don't know why it has troubles in the beginning, but really after about 2 or 3 times that this happens, it seems to stop happening. And presumably there's something in here that tells us what went wrong. But I'm not going to worry about it, because I can restart it faster than I can debug it. Alright, so there's our window with 3 buttons. And Absolute Layout Manager, right? So I can place these things wherever I want, and that's where they will stay. It's not going to do any rearrangement for me. On the other hand, you know, when I have my window, if I make my window too skinny, my buttons disappear. Right? Now, a different layout manager, like a flow manager, I could set it up so that automatically, if my window gets too skinny, these buttons would tile vertically, right? Or if I scrunch it up like that, right, this button might come off to the side, and so on. For what we're doing, we're going to be fine with just a fixed size window, so I'm not going to worry about a fancy layout manager for now. I want to play with some components, okay? JLabels are just, you know, boxes that hold stuff, right? And when you run, you can't change that, okay? It's really just it's a label, it's a piece of text. But from code, I can change it, right? And we'll see how to do that. Okay, text fields, on the other hand, are widgets that you can modify while your program is running. So I can go back and I can type stuff, and I can select, and I can cut, and I can paste, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's a way you can display information, but also get information from the user. Toggle buttons are buttons that are either on or off, right? So these buttons you click and they temporarily press, and when you let go of the mouse they release. Toggle buttons you click and it's pressed, you click again and it's released. So it's like a push button that is like on-off. Okay, radio buttons. This was the other one that crashed me this morning. Yep. So radio buttons are these little, text fields with circles next to them, and you can click on them and a little dot appears in the middle of the circle. So here's radio button 1, and here's 2, and I'll do a few more. I'm like so horrible in lining these things up. Okay, well I got better at the end. Alright, so there's 5 radio buttons. They look like they're exponential. There we go. And right now, they're not acting like radio buttons. So real radio buttons, if I click one, any one that's already clicked should get unclicked. Okay? This was how radio station selectors worked in old car radios mostly. You'd press one button and the previous button would pop out. If you want that behavior, what you have to do is right-click on this button and say, let's set a button group. Okay, and I'll just put it in a new standard button group. And now each of these I can set that button group to button group. And now they're grouped together as a single collection of radio buttons. And so now I can select one, but if I select another one, the previous selection goes away. So they work like radio buttons. Okay, all the stuff that we're doing, dragging and dropping, setting button groups and all that kind of stuff, all that's doing is creating code, right? It's created all of this code for us now. This is where we created our radio button, button 2. This is where we added it to the group, button group, right? And button group is a... button group. Right, button group is an object of type uppercase button group. Right, it's constructed with a new button group. And you can look up the documentation for that. It's a swing object. It's a multiple exclusion scope for a set of buttons. Yeah, it's a radio button control. So we create our frame, we set the bounds of it, we create a panel that we're dropping objects into. We set the border, we put that panel into the frame, and then we created a button 1, set its bounds, added it to the pane, created button 2, set its bounds, added it, created a go button, set its bounds, added it, created a label called stuff, text field, and so on and so forth. Right? Now you can edit this code directly, right? I can change my stuff label to ha 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 ha. And now when I look at my design window, I crash. Eclipse. That was an actual crash. That was a... What was that crash? I don't know what that crash was. That was not just a seg fault. Yeah, it was a seg fault. That's interesting. Alright, so let's do that again. Let's see if we have a repeatable bug. Let's go down to our label. Let me save it this time. Right, so now we changed our label from stuff to ha ha ha. If you're interested in the dark side, by the way, an error report with more information is saved as. So you can look at this file, and this was generated when Eclipse noticed that something was wrong, and it's written a bunch of information into here. Okay, so some of this is about the Java virtual machine. So it was thread 19, and it's got internal ID information and registers of the virtual machine and so on. This is what the stack looks like. This is the address space around where the fault actually happened. It happened at this instruction 2032, but there's some instructions before and after. And there's just tons of information in here. This is a few thousand lines of text. Here's information about the actual physical hardware on which the JVM was running. So you know how much memory was available and the swap space and the contents of your registers, and so on and so forth. So if you're so inclined, right, you can use the information that's in here and actually debug the JVM and figure out exactly what went wrong. And, you know, somebody eventually at some point does that, and these things get better over time. But that somebody is certainly not me, so I'm just going to ignore that file. Alright, so we're back here, right? And making changes over here basically modifies the source code. Okay, so really important thing, be super duper careful about changing this file by hand. Okay? It's got, you know, all code that was generated for you. If you want to make a change to it, it's recommended you make that change by working over here. In other words, if I want to change new toggle buttons text to come out in yellow, right? I think I might be about to crash again. There we go. If I want new toggle buttons text to come out in, say, yellow, right? I can come here, I can change the foreground color to yellow, and now I've got this, you know, impossible to read color there. Or if you want to change the font, right, make it really big. So you can change these properties in the drag and drop interface, and that goes ahead and makes changes in your code. For example, set the foreground color to yellow, set the font to 20, and so on. Now, yeah, I can come in here, I can just delete this line of code, and when I come back to my design window, you know, I'm back to my default color. So you can do manipulations in here, but you really kind of have to play with what you've got. If I just go and I drop a whole bunch of code in the middle of this, it's possible that when I try to go back to my design window, Window Builder, the software that's interpreting this, won't know how to draw this window anymore, right? In other words, this is being reconstructed every time from the source code. And that source code has to be in a format that Window Builder understands. So if you make random changes to it, you might break it. Alright, so you can explore that, but explore it cautiously. And sometimes when you break it, it can figure out how to fix it. But sometimes not. So usually the window associated with, you know, the graphical elements and stuff, I'm just going to make changes out here. Alright, so let's talk about events. Everything we're going to be doing is event driven. So think interrupts from 270, right? We're not going to write code that says, you know, is this button pressed? Okay, how about now? Is it pressed? Okay, is it pressed now? We're going to write code that says when the button is pressed, execute these instructions. And we're going to set things up so that when the button is pressed, everything is set up correctly so that those instructions do what we want them to do. Okay, so for example, button 1, I can right click on this and I can say add an event handler for when the action is performed. For a push button, the action performed means the button was clicked. Okay, so what am I going to do in here? I'm going to say, let's just print a message. Let's say button was clicked. My typing is on point here. Alright, so we'll say button was clicked, and we'll say count plus plus, and I'll make an integer count up here. that'll be the number of times the button was pressed. Alright, so I added some stuff up here. That's going to be okay. When I clicked on the button and said add action, it created this code for me to create a new action listener. And I just went ahead and typed some code inside there. So that's going to work fine. Let's look at the value of count. Alright, so let's run this. So button 1, when I click that, it tells me button was clicked, count equals 1, count equals 2, 3, 4, 5. And I can click while holding down Shift or Control or Alt, but I'm left clicking. If I right click, nothing happens. If I scroll button click, nothing happens. Okay, so action performed is responding to you know, left clicks. Alright, and we can do whatever we want, right? So toggle button, I can say add an event handler for action performed, and I can say toggle button was pressed. And when I click on this, right, I get a message. Now toggle button toggles state. Okay, sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down. We'd like to know what that state is. Let's take a look at what a JToggle button is. Right, and it's an abstract button, component, container, component, and object. JToggle buttons don't have a whole lot of methods available. Right, these 4 things down here, which we don't care too much about. But if I look for selected, I find there's a method that inherits from an abstract button called isSelected. And if I look at the doc on that, it will tell me if the toggle button is selected or not. So let me go back in here, say toggle button pressed. And I'm going to use the toggle button, which is called toggle button new toggle button. I'm going to call it isSelected method. So I'm going to print out toggle button press selected equals, and I'll print the return value from the toggle button new toggle button isSelected method. So I click it, and it tells me toggle button press selected is true. I click it again, it tells me selected is false. So you can interact with these objects through code, right? So designing these graphical programs is a few different steps. One step is designing the interface, which is drag and drop, and you get to choose colors and where things are going to be placed and so on and so forth. Another part is setting up the code to do whatever you want to do in response to the button presses. Okay? And these things go together. Alright, so typing. Let's add an event handler, and let's go down to key, and let's say key typed. Alright. So we get this thing called arg0, which is a key event. And if you look at key event, it's got a lot of fields defined. It has some methods such as getKeyText, getKeyCode, getKeyCharacter. Okay, so let's use getKeyCharacter. So we'll do arg0.getKeyCharacter and run that. So now if I'm inside this box, and I type an A, I get an A. If I type a B, I get a B. If I type a C, I get a C. So when I did a backspace, I got this funny looking character, right, which it doesn't print. When I did a Control A to select everything, same thing, got a funny character. But I can say, you know, HELLO and so on. So we can read what's being typed in here. Now, do we have to do that? Not necessarily. Okay. For example, on a text field, I can add an event handler for action performed. And let's just print a message when action performed is called, right? So this is how we learn about these widgets, right? You can read a lot of documentation on them, but you can also just play with them. Most widgets have an action performed. Let's set the action performed on this text field. And when I type, you know, it tells me I'm typing characters. But when I hit an enter key, it tells me action performed. So if all I care about is what happens when the person hits enter, I don't have to respond to key presses, right? I can just write something that fires when the action is performed. And if I want to know what the text is, well, this is a JText field called text type here. Well, there's a getText method associated with text fields. You can find that in the doc. If I say getText, that'll tell me what the text is in this text field. So if I run this and I say hello there and I hit enter, right? It tells me I saw the action performed and the text in the box was hello there. You can also set text. So after I print out what the text is that was typed in, I might do something like text type here dot set text. Let's get rid of the text. I'm going to get rid of this key press code. So let's run this. So I can type in here. When I hit enter, my code runs, tells me the text was this is a test, and it cleared out the text field. So if you want to have the user type in input and have it respond kind of like you would from a terminal window, right, you can do that inside here just by manipulating a text field. Or maybe instead of printing out characters as they're typed, I can do the following. I have this label called label stuff. And I can set its text equal to arg0.getKeyCharacter. Okay, it's going to be unhappy because it wants a string. Right, and I'm giving it a character, so I can take that character and I can just append a quote to it, and now it turns it into a string. And now as I'm typing in here, right, my little area over here is showing me the character that I'm typing. All right, so this is all goofy stuff, right? It's not particularly useful, but we're just messing around, just trying to get an idea what these things do. All right, so let's look at some other events. So most of these I can set up a variety of events. So for our button, we have action performed. Okay, and if I want to know what's that going to do, right, I click here, it'll take me right to my code where I'm doing the action performed code. add event handler, so I can do, I'm not going to worry about state change. I can do component hidden, component shown, component moved, component resized. Let's do component hidden. I don't know if this will work or not. We'll just print out a message saying I'm hidden. Alright, so this was on button run, right? Nope, not working the way I expected. Alright, pretend I didn't do that, because that didn't work. Alright, forget that one. Focus, so getting focus, losing focus. So if you like tab key around to different widgets, you can fire text when that happens. How about mouse? So let's try mouse moved. I don't know if this will work on a button either. Let's just put a print line mouse moved event, and when I get my mouse over button 1, every time it moves, I trigger this mouse moved event. Okay. If I'm outside, I don't trigger that. If I hold down my left mouse button and I move my mouse into here, I don't get the mouse moved event because this is a mouse drag. Okay, but if I just move the mouse, it fires that event. And most of these widgets I can ask to respond to mouse motion like that. Now you may not need to do that for a button, but maybe you want to, right? So it's fun to make an interface that every time that you put your mouse over the button moves to a random position, so it's impossible to click. And that started a competition one year to see who could make the most annoying interface. And we got some really good responses to that. So you can respond to key presses, mouse clicks, mouse movements, mouse wheel, right? So let's go ahead and let's just print out wheel when we're in here. So now I'm pointing at button 1. Why am I getting wheel events? Because I put my code in the wrong spot. So there's a wheel listener. And when I'm sitting over button 1, if I turn the scroll wheel, I get a message saying that something happened. And if we look at the argument that's passed to this mouse wheel event, this argument E, it has information about the wheel action. So when I turn my wheel, when I move my scroll wheel up, I'm getting this message that says wheel rotation equals -1. When I scroll down, I get wheel rotation equals +1. So I can tell which way the wheel is moving. And if I hold down the wheel button and I scroll, then I get this modifier on here and so on and so forth. So all this stuff is accessible, okay? And you really just kind of have to start either looking at the properties that are available for these objects and the methods that are available to respond to, the events that it'll respond to, or spend some time on the documentation. I think it's more fun to mess with it. So I could, for example, say, what is this button called? Button, set text to the count, right? So now every time that I run this and I click on the button, it tells me how many clicks I've had. All right. Hopefully you're getting the idea of this. Hopefully this is making some sense. All right, so this one is really useful. If we left click just over here, we're looking at the content pane. We can set event handlers for that as well. And so a really useful one might be mouse motion. And so let's do mouse dragged. And the arguments passed to this E has a getX method and a getY method. And so I'm just going to print out the XY coordinates of this mouse event. And so now when I'm dragging my mouse, I'm getting XY coordinates of wherever the mouse is pointing, starting with 0, 0 in the upper left and going down to whatever the dimensions of the frame are. And when I'm moving over a button, the button is picking up the mouse events, not the frame, so I'm not getting those mouse event actions. But when I'm just pointing at the frame, right, I'm responding to mouse motion. So this is all like toolbox stuff, right? These are the things that are in your toolbox that you can use to do all kinds of other things, okay? So PA4, I'm going to have you make a game. It's a game called Dots. I don't know if that's the official name, but I played it a lot when I was an undergrad. I almost failed my numerical methods course because I got a friend into playing Dots during class. But it's a fun little game, and it's a two-person game, and you're going to build a graphical version of it in Java using Swing that lets people play the game on the computer. And then maybe for PA5 we're going to network it so that two people can play the game remotely. Haven't decided on that yet. So we're going to be making a playing field and drawing things on here and responding to mouse clicks and use buttons and text fields and labels and things like that. And it'll be just kind of putting these pieces together and writing some code, event-driven code, right, to respond so that when somebody clicks, something happens, and so on and so forth. So tomorrow I want to dig more into these different classes, look at the kinds of things we can do with Swing. I want to start looking at painting and see how we can actually do some graphics, right, which we did really quickly the first week, but I want to go into the details of that. And then Wednesday we'll break into PA4, talk about it in all its details, and get going on that. All right, any questions on any of this stuff? All right, well, I will leave it at that. Have a good rest of the day, and I will see you tomorrow.